I'm Duncan McLeod, and this is the TechCentral Show, brought to you by MTN Business. Subscribe on youtube.com/TechCentral or subscribe to our daily newsletter at techcentral.co.za/newsletter. Now, Bryan Hattingh is my next guest. Bryan, I think you must be one of the people I've known in this industry the longest. It's really good to see you in the studio. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Duncan. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to see you. And yes, we've known each other some time.
Would it be rude to call you a veteran of the local industry?
I'm happy for you to call me whatever you like. I've got this Peter Pan sort of syndrome that convinced I'm going to live forever. And the little boy inside of me remains very wide awake. But I am a veteran. So there we go. I have to admit that.
Great. Yeah. Now, Bryan, you're a leadership specialist. You do things like helping companies find senior level resources. You also coach and provide other services through your business, Cycan, to businesses across South Africa and I think in other countries as well.
Indeed.
So we're going to have a discussion all about leadership today, which I'm really looking forward to. And it actually flows from an interview we did a few weeks ago with Colin Govender of Ultron, where he spoke about the crisis of leadership in South Africa. And I think that discussion hit home for you in a way. And you want to unpack in some detail your views around leadership and the leadership crisis that we're facing in this country. And there's a heck of a lot to talk about around the subject. So I think we should dive straight into it. Bryan, I think maybe a good place to start would be to ask you, what is required of leadership in 2023 and how is that different to previous years?
Well, let me make a foundational statement saying what's required of leadership is integrity and authenticity and good intentionality. And that should have applied throughout the period building up to here, and most certainly should apply moving forward, because we live in very different times. We live in a very complex world. We live in a world of great uncertainty in which that equation is going to increase. And the rate of change. We live in an accelerating universe, and change has continued to increase as we've gone along. We've heard about and lived in and through the exponential world and the stripping of past Moore's law and all those good things. And the world was challenged before COVID. People were trying to find their way in it, and it affected different people differently depending on the industries they were in, because some were more affected than others. But along came COVID and really rocked the boat. People experienced, and on a global stage, this was not happening in pockets here or there around the world. It happened everywhere, and people had to experience conditions that were unprecedented, and that put people into a challenging space. And we've come out of COVID hoping that the world was going to sort of get better, and in fact, it's become even more volatile and more uncertain, and the Russian-Ukraine scenario and many others that we've got to look at. And at the same time, very strange behavior on behalf of political leaders around the world. Not ideal. Certainly don't fit the model, And what we're seeing in terms of leadership today is as I mentioned earlier, we live in a complex world. 20th century was complicated, and businesses were able to complicated meaning, and very often those two terms get interchanged, which they're not. They're not interchangeable. They are two separate words and separate meanings. Complicated meaning something that you can apply process to and structure and plan, and you can look to see a defined outcome to it. And our world very much worked along that way. Post-war, we saw the industries and that build and grow and develop in the way that they did with that type of planning. General Motors, Apple, or the computer industry did that. But coming into the 21st century, the world has become complex, and we have to approach it in a systemic way, and we have to approach it in a way that is inclusive in more ways than what we've previously seen and understood inclusive to mean. Not just getting...
Just expand on that. What do you mean by more inclusive?
So you're needing to have more voices in the room.
Okay.
We're seeing that the problems that we're facing and the dynamic of the continued change needs different thinking. And even though you've still got great people with great minds, the Steve Jobs of the world, the Bill Gates of the world were amazing people with amazing minds, and they forged and built incredible companies and changed the world in and through what they did. There's no question of that. The world's a different place because of it. But we're seeing that today not one individual is going to stand out. So apart from the Elon Musks of the world who seem to think that they can and do a lot of that. But if just a sidebar, Elon's success, apart from his own great vision and his incredible pertinacity and resolve, was he hired amazing people, and empowered them and enabled them to get on with and to follow through and build on his dreams and to apply their creative thought. So what we're seeing today is we're needing leaders to move away from a traditional command and control style of leadership towards a coaching, leaders coach, inclusive, transformational style of leadership. And here's an interesting piece.
That must be very difficult for some leaders, though.
Oh, hugely, hugely. But here's something that's going to really interest you if you didn't know about it. Some of the first pioneers of transformational leadership was the U.S. Marines.
Oh, yeah.
So why did they do that? Because war that became non-conventional in the Gulf and in Afghanistan and in Iraq required people to be able to make decisions themselves. They couldn't wait for a sergeant or a lieutenant or a captain or somebody to shout and bark an order at them. They had to make a call on their own. The Marines saw that, and they introduced that type of shift and change. And that birthed a whole team of teams and lots of different things that came with it. And so it's about helping people leaders today need to be able to dance. They need to be able to know when it's appropriate to step into which particular leadership archetype. There's a time for command and control. If people's lives are at risk, or there's risk of life or limb, you don't have a time to have consensus and to have debate and have to inclusion. Then you need to bark out an order in order that people are protected.
It must have been very difficult during COVID for those command and control type leaders in organizations when suddenly everyone had to go and work at home. There was no sight of people in the office. The CEO didn't really know where people were, what they were doing at any given time. How did that impact leaders who had that approach prior to the pandemic? And I mean, it must have been a shock to the system.
It definitely was a shock to the system, and a lot of it lies in the fact that we go through our lives. We come through the educational chain at whatever point, knowledgeable, informed, qualified, and a little bit clueless, and go through life without a map and without a plan.
I'm still a bit clueless.
And if you got the smarts and you pretty talented, you make a measure of success out of what you're doing, and that success tends to breed success. And so we end up in this position where, as we continue to move down this path on our journey through this time called life, our canvas might get bigger in terms of our IP and intellectual capital, but our view of it becomes narrower and narrower. And we continue so often to apply what's worked before. I mean, we've seen the books, what got you here won't get you there, and very, very true, And so what happens is that people are so used to doing it. I mean, how many times have people heard that expression, this is the way we do things around here? Well, guess what? That doesn't apply anymore because that may not work. Forbes magazine published a statement quite some years back. They said that the companies and people most likely to fail are those that are successful. Gosh, wow, that's a bit of a turn for the books. But why? Because they're busy being successful and not necessarily checking out what's going down. And unless an event happens to redirect them or to cause them to step back and step up and look and say, is this what we're doing? Is this going to actually work for us? And how do we need to do things differently? So we find that leaders that are so steeped in that command and control, which, by the way, an interesting perspective here, over all the years of coaching, we've been coaching execs now for 22, 23 years, formally. We did informal coaching before them because we were defined as a career consultancy before we moved into the business Cycan, which we opened in 2001. We've coached literally thousands of accomplished, successful executives and leaders at different levels. We can say to you quite comfortably that the majority of them are motivated by fear. which is really quite surprising because you would think that these accomplished, successful people would be motivated by towards two type goal-centric initiatives.
What fear? Fear of the competition?
And it's not a conscious thing. So it's not that they would put up their hand and say, oh, by the way, I'm motivated by fear.
Yeah.
It's just that, and in fact, we wired neurologically to have twice the propensity to avoid fear than we do anything else because it's part of our self-preservation mechanism and survival mechanism.
Goes back to our hunter-gatherer days. Right?
Exactly. So we naturally tend to move into a always operate out of a risk avoidance model.
Yeah.
If you think about the dictionary definition of risk, delightful. Risk, it says, and you can look at almost any definition of it, says danger, hazard, peril, potential loss. It doesn't say, oh, by the way, when embraced and managed can bring about great accomplishments. Every single accomplishment in the history of mankind was previously deemed to be impossible. But by taking huge leaps of faith, embracing large amounts of risk, man accomplished these things along the way, which has brought us to where we are today. Cameras, microphones, TV, internet, all these good things. Hannibal took elephants over the Alps. Columbus stood on the deck of the Santa Maria or the Nina or the Pinta, I don't know which boat he was standing on, and he said, I'm going to find a new way to India. And America got in the way. The Wright brothers, et cetera, we can go on and on.
Does his propensity to take risk then make Elon Musk one of the world's great leaders?
Look, I think he sort of borders on cavalier. I mean, if not, but I love what I really liked about Elon Musk, particularly in the early days, was his absolutely relentless pertinacity and conviction about his belief and his pursuit. And what I think when people have forgotten about Elon, the things that he's done has been for the betterment of humanity. Everything he's been looking at to do is how do I make this planet a better place? How do I make it a better world?
Which is not what drives most business leaders.
No, unfortunately
most business leaders are driven by money and returns and financial metrics.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Sadly. The measure of, the continued thing of returns to shareholders. Absolutely agree. Shareholders should get their returns. They should be taken care of. But they shouldn't be sacrosanct. It shouldn't be that it's all about the shareholders.
They're not the only stakeholder.
No. In fact, we've got to be looking in this new world, this systemic world we're in, we've got to be looking right across the stakeholder chain, all the way through not only the shareholders and the customers and the people in the business, very important stakeholders, but what about the citizens, and what about our grandchildren, and what about the ecosystem? What about the world? What is the world asking of us right now? So many of our leaders are saying, what am I expecting of the world? And the thing is that let's go back to that intentionality thing. If you start out from a me mindset, what's in it for me? Then the behaviors aren't going to follow very nicely because people become dispensable. The ends justify the means. And we can go back, whether it be Steinhoff, whether it goes back to Pamela, whether it goes back to WorldCom, whether it goes back to Enron, whether it goes back to Lehman Brothers. I mean, Lehman Brothers was a prime example. Richard S. Full Jr. was a despicable leader. He was known as the gorilla. And I mean, he had a leadership style that said, quote unquote, I'll go down there and put my hand down his throat and tear out his heart. Now, isn't that a wonderful way for your leader to speak about what his stuff means? And he paid himself multiples of millions of dollars bonus in 2007, reportedly in excess of $100 million bonus. What did he do to deserve that? Put that aside. And along comes 2008, and they were primary in the whole market crash. And he was, and is an example of many of the leaders that suffer from hubris syndrome, which needs to be separated from narcissists. You get narcissists, and narcissist is a psychological condition, and it is a psychological disorder. Hubris is a syndrome that actually is caused as a consequence of success and wealth. And by the way, when the success and wealth goes away, the hubris syndrome goes away as well. Margaret Thatcher was a victim of hubris syndrome. Eventually, the MPs had to get her to to stand down because she was starting to make crazy decisions. Because what comes with the hubris syndrome in time is
you
delusionment.
start to think you're always right.
You're delusionment, and you start thinking that you're always right.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we've got a wealth of these folk in our political sphere in South Africa, not just South Africa, but particularly in South Africa. And we've got a whole bunch of them that prevail in different degrees in
Business.
in our business. And leaders, it's something that should become part of leadership training, is for leaders to develop an awareness of what hubris is, and to have for themselves an early warning system.
Okay.
Because it's something you can manage and can control. So much of it comes down to the choices we make. But you see, I'll go back to that thing of teachers, our schools, our colleges, university don't teach us life planning, decision making, goal setting. Some of them do now. I mean, that's all evolved. But going back historically, and career management. And so, as I go back to that thing about how do people make decisions, what are you making it on, and what is that fundamental purpose? What is your life purpose? I'm not getting quite esoteric and philosophical here, but if you can define in one statement, so let's look at the Stephen Covey lovely example of what people say about you at your funeral, or would your epitaph be, or what have you. But forget about the projecting. Legacy is not projected to some time when you die. Legacy is today.
Yeah.
Because if that's what you want to be remembered for, if you die today, will people report that? Is that how and if it isn't, what do you have to change? But if you can have a clear sense of what really is your Nike swish, just do it. What is your just do it that you want to leave on the world, that you want to leave in the relationships that you have, that you want to leave in how you engage in business and how you lead your people and how you engage with your customers, that they know that's dependable, that's consistent, that's the underlying framework of who you are. If you've got that defined, now you've got a point of reference for every single decision you make. Am I reflecting that? Am I expressing that? If not, why am I doing it? And if it comes back to that, I'm here to be a servant to you, which is what our political leaders should really be. They paid to serve the people, not to dictate to the people. They're here to serve the people.
And business leaders are there to serve their customers and other stakeholders.
Their customers and their staff. I mean, at the end of the day, they are privileged in the position of where they have all this influence and capability and vision and capacity. And yes, they are called upon to be visionary. They are called upon to set the stage and to set the tone. But most of all, it's not about, obviously what they do is important, but it's much more about how do they show up and how do they do what they do? What's that presence that they bring into the room? And how do they engage people? Do they truly have empathy? But you see, if it's all just about me, then the empathy tends to disappear and go out the door. When it's about you and it's about us, it's about we. Let's make it a we thing, which includes me. This is not about pure altruism where you sacrifice yourself on the altar of we. This is actually about the more you can determine the me, the more you can elevate the me in the right way, with good principles and good practice and good pursuits, and continually overfilling your place, if I can put it that way, increasing your capacity, not just your capabilities and competencies, but your capacity to impact, influence, and add value. So you then are able to add that much more to the equation, able to give that much more. You can produce much more than you consume. And if we can create leaders that do that and are looking that way, then the rewards are automatic. Branson put it beautifully. He said, true entrepreneurs never set out to make money. They set out to do something nobody's ever done before, or do something better than anybody's done. And as a consequence of that, they make money. So if money can become the consequence, I'm all for creating wealth. I'm all for building that. But there's a beautiful expression that I've heard when I was a young man that I've kept all my life, and that is, true wealth is not measured by how much you have. It's measured by your ability to share. And that's not just about sharing the money. It's about how do you take this we're only here for a short time.
I had the privilege of meeting Richard Branson.
Did you?
Probably about 15 years ago when he was out here. In fact, I interviewed him on the back of a Learjet from Cape Town to Joburg. And
how was he?
He was relaxed and completely chilled, and there was no sense of ego about him. No. He in fact, he apologized for his stuttering and his mannerisms, and he was really not what you'd expect of a billionaire. But there's so many billionaires and company founders, and we see it in the tech industry, of examples of people with narcissistic personality disorders.
Sure.
Why are so many CEOs in that category with their personalities? Is it something that happens to them because the world adores them and on the front page of the front cover of Forbes and Fortune and the Financial Times, etc., etc.? Do you think that ego kind of builds up as people stroke their egos, or do you think that they come to those positions when they start those companies they're already narcissists?
So I go back to my point, and I think it would be great if we could do a separation and sift the wheat from the chaff of which of those leaders are suffering from hubris and which of them are intrinsically narcissistic. Right. And, if you're a narcissist, it's a pretty incurable thing. I mean, that's just is what it is. And there's look, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't want to make statements here that could be incorrect or
not medical advice.
Not medical advice. But let's just go with the fact that there are those who come in and there are people who are narcissists, and they're not nice people. And they're going to people who are dispensable, and which does not mean they can't be hugely successful, because they often are brilliant people. That's part of what comes with it, and they're able to.
Steve Jobs is a classic example. He's famous firing people in the elevator. People were terrified of getting into the elevator at Apple with Jobs because he would ask them, "Well, what do you do here? Tell me about your job." And by the time the elevator ride had finished and he wasn't convinced by your answer, he'd fire you in the elevator. I mean, that can't be normal behavior, right?
That's definitely not normal behavior, and it's not the way to run a company. That's sustainable. And yet, look where Apple is today.
Look how successful
what it's done, and so people could get into huge debates about it. But he's not there anymore, and I think that I do think that he mellowed.
Okay,
I do believe he mellowed over time, and particularly after he had left and come back, and he still was very eccentric fellow. I mean, as a lot of those leaders are.
Exactly, yeah.
So it comes back to what is this greater intention, and what is the greater purpose that you're working towards as a business? What's the vision? What is this lasting impression? And it comes back to this thing of, we can talk about the payoff lines that many companies have. And Nike's a great one to use because it's so simple. Nike, Swish, the tick, it's so visible and recognizable. Just do it. That's stood the test of time. And it's, are you just do it? Well, I can say to you that when Nike first came into South Africa, it wasn't just do it. And that was because of the leader that they appointed as the CEO, was the CFO of the previous distributor, who had less personality than the chair I'm sitting on. And it was diabolical. I mean, you could see it in the absenteeism was off the charts, dysfunctional executive team, etc. So what is that payoff line that you, as an organization, that speaks to the customer experience? Because at the end of the day, we don't own the brand. It lives in the hearts and minds of customers. How they experience us is what our brand is. So we can have all the pretty slogans and sayings and all the rest of it. Do those things marry? So brand identity is one thing, and we can get very creative and very cool about it. But it's actually about how do we make sure that is seamlessly mirrored in a type of Mobius strip with the customer experience across every touch point. That's how you will be experience the company.
Let's talk a bit about how you measure success in 2023. I mean, we touched earlier on how many companies focus on Heps and EPS and EBITDA and net profit and all those things as the measure of their success. And certainly analysts are judging them, and that's the thing that drives the share price at the end of the day. But you're saying there are more important things that should be used to measure a leader's success in an organization. What would you say are those top metrics?
So metrics is a big word. So, I mean, I think some of the things that are really important might be difficult to measure in the way that you would measure the tangible Heps and Ebitda and what have you. But it most certainly plays out in how it could be a measure, for example, in their turnover of staff. How many people are leaving your company? People don't leave companies, they leave managers, And how does this play out? So there are all sorts of surveys and studies that can be done to check out the health of your company and where it is. I think that In fact, there was something really interesting that was introduced in the UK called the Empathy Index, which they put into call centres, and where they were actually able to measure increased ROI and return on capital employed within the call centres based on how their call centre staff engaged differently by having been inducted into and made aware of the importance of and the inculcation of an empathetic approach to how they dealt with particularly inbound callers. There's a lovely story, just an aside. There's a story of America's got lots and lots and lots of lawnmower hire companies.
Okay.
And they have untold numbers of legal suits against them for people who do all sorts of bizarre injuries to themselves with lawnmowers. You'd think that people were sensible and didn't hurt themselves, but they do. And one particular company reduced their number of legal actions against them by 1,000%. You know what they did? They said sorry. That's all I did.
They just said sorry.
They said sorry. We're so sorry. Instead of getting on the back foot and fighting and dogging, they said sorry. They introduced that human element, that human condition. We're living in a world where people are super stressed. We're living in a world where people go back to the COVID thing of here you are. You talked about the leaders and how did they manage to do that? How could they continue to create continuity of culture as people left and new people were hired? Companies had to do that, but they weren't coming into an office where they got immersed in this culture, because culture is the way we do things around here. Culture is the collective behaviors and what people see and feel. And people, of course, were at home being hit by the tsunami of negative content from all the media, half of which wasn't even true, and spiraling into states of fear and anxiety. And we saw medical disorders soaring, anxiety disorders soaring. We saw suicide rates soaring, divorce rates soaring. And leaders having to really manage that without knowledge. How did they manage to do this? And we now in this post time where some companies have got the hybrid work thing, which is working for some companies and really not working for others. And for some people, they don't want to go back to work, and others are happy to go back to work. And you've got this whole mishmash of things, and a lot of people still remaining remote. So the world continues to evolve and change. And in the midst of it, we've seen unprecedented levels of burnout. Deloitte and McKinsey is reporting ridiculous percentile of burnout in the workplace. We, as part of what we do, we've got diagnostics that actually measure the resilience levels and self-worth levels and burnout levels right now in the moment. This is not speculative. It's an actual neuroscience tool measuring it, registered with the Health Professional Council of South Africa. And so we're seeing unprecedented levels of people going into burnout. And that's very challenging because, one, it's not a clinical condition. Clinical depression is, that's a clinical condition, not burnout. It's never been. It's a syndrome. It's not defined as a clinical condition, and people don't put their hands up and say, "Hey, by the way, I'm burning out." Some eventually get to that place, but so how do you know? How do you know how many of your people are burning out? What are the levels? And so you've got the issue of absenteeism, but what about presenteeism? What's presenteeism? It's those people that are at work, but not really there. They're absent. And you've got people who are operating in this state of fear and anxiety where if you go into the whole thing of creativity and innovation, that comes out of prefrontal cortex, out of your executive brain. And when you're in a state of fear, you don't go into your executive brain. And so people will be doing what they've done before, putting out the work. So you look from a distance and yes, the people are working. In fact, they're working harder. No, they're not really. They're working longer because they've been staying at home and they haven't got anything else to do. So the things are blurring and they're flowing over into these different things. And so the measures are a little bit blurry. And so leaders are having to step back and think differently about how they're going to engage. And it starts with, how do I engage? How am I engaging with myself? Am I okay? Because you've got a whole lot of leaders that are in states of fear and not just the old fear motivation thing.
Often as the CEO is the most stressed person in the organization.
Usually, and they've got nobody to talk to. Who do they speak to? And so they're having to make calls on their own. And let's go back to, if their intentionality is how do we collectively create a better place? How do we, you asked for the measures or in the metrics. So I'm saying to you this, it's actually around the health and well-being of the people of your organization.
Is that a role of the HR director to coach the CEO when he is facing a stressful situation? No. How does the CEO, I mean, it's a very lonely position to be in. You're under severe stress. Your company perhaps is in trouble. How do you get past that? I mean, it must feel like a very deep place, a deep hole to be in, potentially, if you don't have anyone around you can turn to.
So you speak right to the sweet spot of things. Think about this. No single, that I know of, professional sports person, sports team, Olympian, doesn't have a whole bunch of coaches. And it's a natural given. And you know what? Their world's much less complex compared to that of business leaders. There are much more dependencies for business leaders, much more variables and uncertainties. As a javelin thrower, all I've got to do is get out and make sure that I throw the javelin the best way to eat the right foods, get the right sleep, do the right exercise. So why would it be that you wouldn't have, so I mean the top golfers, tennis players, have got great coaches. We've seen what a big difference it made. You think of the Olympic swimmers, for example, in the last Olympics, where the difference between the top 3 or 4 were hundredths of a second. What is making that difference? So how do we as executives in this clearly uncertain space, with uncertainty not just in the workplace, but at home, in my personal life, and what am I doing? How do I find my way? And we all stand up, self-made people, particularly South Africans, the men, but we're talking not just about men here, we're talking about people of all levels, of all genders, of all classes. You've got lots of amazing women in business and women leaders, and may there be more and more of them that emerge. But, we've got to find a way for that, and having an external coach makes a whole lot of sense. And it's not about, you need coaching. The moment you say that, you've got the whole movie wrong. You can benefit enormously by having a truly professional, appropriately aligned coach to work with you, because it's not about that you're broken and need to be fixed. This is actually about how do we take this excellence of you and move it to that next level of play and of being.
I suppose when you've got a huge ego, though, it's very difficult to admit that you need help.
But I go back to the point. Let's not call it needing help. Let's say, you know what? There's so much that there's 4 categories of knowledge. There's things that we know that we know. There's things that we know that we don't know. There's things that we don't know that we know, such as our unconscious competencies, which we've acquired as a consequence of what we've done, not a focus of what we've done. And then there's the vast expanse of things that we don't know, including about ourselves and our own potential. We're only using a fraction of our potential. And the being that I am is just the sum total of the choices and the actions and the experiences that I've had today. And as great or otherwise as it may be, how much more are we than what we've become? We're much more than what we've become. And if we hold on to it, the principle is our best is yet to come. And how do we get that? Because everybody's got blind spots. And some of us have got a whole bunch of sabotage patterns. And we've got our unconscious competencies. So why don't we find a way to unlock these things and to become aware of them so that we can leverage them and manage it better and learn to not only change the lenses that we're looking at the world, but let's change the vantage point that we're looking at it from. Because you see, if I'm sitting here always looking in this direction, that's the extent of my view. But if I turn to the side and I look behind me, I find that there's so much more I haven't even seen. So how do we get ourselves in the busyness of today and the run? And so what we're saying is, guys, let's just move from being human doings to being human beings. Let's get back to the being bit of it. Let's get back to the realization that, death is a finite point, whatever that is. Every day we've got one day less to do all the things in life we want to do. 86,400 seconds in your bank account. That gets cleared every day.
So you better enjoy it.
Enjoy it. Are you living a life well lived? Are you living a full life? Is this everything? There was a lovely example, I forget who it was, but it's such a great thing of we all juggling balls and seemingly more and more balls. Some of them are rubber, others are glass. None of the business balls are glass. They're all rubber. What are the glass balls? Health, family, friendship, love, contribution, legacy. The business balls you can drop. There might be consequences, there might be money lost, there might be stuff.
Might get fired.
But you drop the health ball.
Yeah.
You drop the life ball. What are the sacrifices that these so many leaders have made along the way in terms of their relationships, their families, the whole thing? I mean, this almost sounds cliched, but remember, behind every cliche is a very deep truth that just it's become lip service, and that whole story of what's really important for life. What's really. That we got all these things coming at us under the banner of urgent.
Yes.
Urgent. Got to do this now. Got to do this. I have to, I got to. And you put aside the vital things. So quality time with your kid, not urgent. If you skip today, it's fine. If you skip the training session today, it's not critical. But if you skip it tomorrow and the next day, we now fall into a trap of you're no longer exercising, you're not eating right, you're not sleeping right. Ask your busy executives, ask them those 3 questions around their baseline states. How are you living?
Reminds me,
crazy answers.
I know you're a fellow rock music fan, Bryan, and so you'll remember the song Time by Pink Floyd, which of course covers a lot of that ground.
Ticking away the moments that make up a dull day.
Exactly.
Fritter and waste the hours in an old-fashioned way. Kicking around on a piece of ground in your hometown, waiting for something or someone to show you the way. Tired of lying in the sunshine, laying home to watch the rain. You are young and life is yours, and always something more to say. And then one day you find 10 years have got behind you. No one told you when to run. You missed the starting gun.
Wow, you know the lyrics.
How often does that happen to people? You suddenly look around and what happened to my life? Where did it go? And the thing is as well, you see, we've got to get a mindset of realization. We're living longer and living healthier. And our financial planning for retirement, that R word, not going to really shape up for most people unless you create independent wealth. And, the line is sort of 60, maybe earlier, maybe a bit later. Countries like the Netherlands support older people staying on. So yeah. And what if you live to 90 or 95 or longer? I mean, look at what we're doing with stem cell, nano, biotech and all the rest of it. What are you going to do? The retirement planning is not about the money, man. It's about what's the lifestyle you're introducing now in living richly and fully that, by the way, will help you to show up better at work. That'll show you up more engaged, more energized, more creative. What are you doing for creativity? Because so much of the world that we live in is all about left brain, task, numbers, measure. What about the creativity? Oh, no, I'm not a creative person. Nonsense. We all are. It's about, you might not be a world-famous artist, but, how are you spending? Are you spending any time stepping into that space?
All right, Bryan, I'm going to pivot the conversation a little
Sure.
bit. I want to talk about talent and specifically in the South African context, talk about skills here. We know that immigration has spiked again.
Yeah.
The country's in all sorts of trouble, and particularly in the IT sector, we've seen a lot of talent leaving. I think we all know, we've all got family or friends who've left to go and live in another country, worried about the future of this country. From a skills and talent perspective, I mean, this is one of the roles, one of the areas that Cycan specializes in, finding senior leadership to fill important roles in the economy. What's it like out there? Can you find, you are often asked to find talent to fill a particular role. Yeah. How difficult has that become?
So I'm very happy to report that we continue to find amazing gems of people, and that's across demographics. In high difficulty index searches.
Okay.
Not easy at all. In fact, somehow it seems to be our area of specialization, and it's not like we go and seek it, with the intent. But these guys come along and we'd like this. You want one of those? Okay, really? Okay, let's just let me just. You want not only to walk on water, you want them to leave footprints. And yet we get to find these people, and part of it is also applying a different mindset. And of course, it'll differ if you're hiring somebody for a very specific technical function.
Right.
Where they've got to either have that technical skill and do it really well.
Okay.
But when you've moved into the, let's call it the leadership space, it's amazing how you can transport people and migrate people from one industry to another, depending on, once again, the context and the requirement, and allow them to migrate into a new space and bring with them those unconscious competencies, that presence, that stature, that ability to understand business and to make business happen and tick, and importantly, to be a profound leader. So it goes back to also, again, why they're doing it. And so we will spend an inordinate amount of time even before we present opportunities and present people in getting them to go very deep in terms of where they're at in their lives, what are they doing, why would they be doing it, what's their next runway of pursuit, so that they're making a decision not about what's the role, what's the money, what's the wealth creation, what's the pedigree. Those are all important. They're not imperatives. The imperatives are, what's the challenge, what's the stretch, what's the strategic alignment, what's the growth, what's it about this role that's going to cause me to increase my capacity and impact, etc. And you'll be surprised that there are a lot of great people out there. Having said that, we've lost a lot of great talent. A lot of great talent, and continue to, and a lot of great leaders. And so part of that, I think, is just part of people wanting to work abroad in the natural course of events. It's just gotten that much more exacerbated by the concern, particularly for young emerging leaders around who have got families, to say, I need to get my kids into a space where there's a better platform for opportunity for them from an education, from a career perspective. When you look at the unemployment figures in this country, people with emerging young adults, it must be, goodness me, how are we going to manage for them? Because it's a scary landscape, and we as a country need to do something about it urgently on many, many levels, and that's a subject for another day. We can sort of touch on that.
Sure.
But yeah, there's talent, but there's a very real outflow, and it's about how do you comes back to this is not a cookie cutter thing. This is how companies approach their acquisition of strategic talent is quite dismal in many respects. And it plays out in the conversations we have when we discover actually how inexperienced they are and how they haven't thought it through. So often the hiring process is as a consequence of a departure. It's a reactive process. It's not a proactive, we see this coming down the line in 6-9 months, or our current leader is going to be either promoted or moved on, or they've got a retirement plan ahead of them. That's a very small percentile of the time of the mandates that come about. Most of them is because somebody suddenly stepped up and stepped in. Sadly, somebody might have passed away, but more often they've moved off to another pasture, and they hurriedly now wanting to replace them. Succession planning in the world of work never was great in most companies. Some of them got it right, but the world's changing so fast and so differently, and what the organization was 5 years ago and the leader it needed then may be very different now. We might have moved from a fairly static organization into a highly acquisitive organization. Maybe the strategic decisions to go for an accelerated growth model, and you're needing a different type of executive and a transition executive to come in rather than a caretaker executive. And so the people that you were grooming up, the internal candidates, and yes, it's always great to promote from within, don't necessarily stack up. And we're seeing that rather often, Duncan, that the internal talent is not necessarily not good or got great potential, but it's not ready to make that step up into that bigger job. And the companies then have to go externally. And then it comes down to how do they do that? And of course, for many, it's an expensive exercise, and companies would like to, if they could, not have to incur the perceived cost of hiring it. Putting aside what's the cost of doing it wrong, what's the cost of not doing it right. What are you not going to get by doing it that way? And old schoolboy networks are all good, and references are good, and all the rest of it. Bring those into the equation. My recommendation is apply a scientific a method of both science and art to do this properly, because the war for talent is definitely on the increase. It's going to be tougher and tougher to find really great talent, and don't fall into the trap of promoting people beyond their readiness, not beyond their ability or potential, but beyond their readiness, because you don't want to set people up to fail. And we've seen a lot of that happen over time. I had an instance some years back where we had to find a CFO for a small cap listed tech company. And one of the candidates that got put in front of me was a young lady who had a BE candidate she was a CA, and she had 3 jobs in 4 years. So I asked her to come and see me, and she came in and I said, "This is not going to go the way you thought it was." I said to her, "I want you to go back to your job and not put your head up for 3 years. I need you to get your head down and get some depth and breadth of experience, because you're just committing, professional suicide." Because companies are looking through their fingers, and allowing people to make these moves is not a good move, because it gives people the perception that it's okay. It's not okay. We need to be building. It goes back to move away from the principle, and I'd love to get more and more people to get on this journey. Move away from the concept and principle of a linear CV.
Yeah.
Went to school, studied, did that, doing this now. That's all good and well, and it tells a certain story, but it only tells part of the story. And, shortness of tenure isn't a good thing, and also length of tenure isn't necessarily saying all that much either. Think about it as a portfolio, a holistic portfolio of offering. Think of yourself, although you're in the formal sector and you're working for an employer and you're an employee, think of yourself as a PDY Limited. Your knowledge, your expertise, your learning, all those things, everything that makes you is your offering. Is it in an increasing or diminishing market? How do you price it? How do you package it? How do you take it to market? What R&D do you do on it? How do you sell it? How do you manage it? And what's most important at any point in time for anybody out there in the world of work, particularly in today's world, you've got to answer 3 questions. People needing to be optimally relevant, mobile and marketable. You've got to be optimally effective. You've got to be building this portfolio of accomplishments. It's not about how many years have you been in the job. It's what have you done? What have the achievements been? What did you do to contribute to that? And to continually have that mindset, and to be willing to go the extra mile and to do what it takes to build this portfolio. Because that way, your company's going to want you more and more and take care of you and look after you, and you're going to position yourself optimally for promotion and for further opportunities of growth. But it also means in this world of change and what have you, that you are positioned to be effective. And also it becomes a conscious thing. It's not just I'm going to work and doing my job every day. It's actually mapping out and thinking about it and asking yourself the question, how am I able to actually move to that next level of impact and capability in what I do? What do I need to learn? What do I need to read? What do I need to study? Let me be, how do I become increasingly curious about the world that we're in today? How do I become increasingly expectant? The whole principle of gratitude, having an attitude of gratitude, and having the willingness to contribute hope in the whole equation. Each of us as leaders, regardless of our level, are in essence merchants of hope. We're there to actually express confidence and assuredness and certainty in terms of not necessarily what the outcome's going to be and what the world's going to be, but in terms of our ability to show up and to make the most out of whatever situation we find ourselves in, and being able to rally people and bring them together and to give them that inspiration, and helping them to see and to realize that they too can be more than what they've become.
Bryan, before I let you go, you've immersed yourself in this subject of leadership for decades.
Yeah.
There's clearly a leadership problem in our political system.
Yeah.
Not just here in South Africa, but we see this in other markets around the world. The US, the UK has been through its challenges lately. Liz Truss, for example. Yeah. And in South Africa, there's a common view that we come up with good ideas, but they never seem to get implemented. What's gone wrong, both globally and in South Africa, with politics? Why are poor leaders being appointed? What's behind this, and how does it get fixed?
So let's take South Africa to start with. It's a challenge of an almost one-party state.
Right.
It's been for a very long time.
Been in power too long.
Yeah, your opposition has sort of been there as a noise, but not really like we've
Party
seen
in
in the
government.
States, where you've got the Republicans and Democrats literally boxing all the way through, and it can go either way. And therefore people, in principle, having to be kept on their toes. And the problem also is that the longer that stays in place, the more accustomed we become to it, the more comfortable we become to it, and the more potential exists if your leaders aren't truly of integrity and authenticity and of good intent, that things get lost in translation. And particularly when in the South African context, there's that element of, well, it's, we needing to, and I'm not saying that there isn't very real substance in the fact that there needed to be a correction and a righting of the system and creating equal opportunity and opening the wall up. But I don't see the people, the man in the street, having had equal opportunity. I just see people, the
usual
the poverty gap has gotten bigger and bigger, and we've seen a whole lot of people being enriched that enormously. And as a consequence, we see a government that it's about protecting the party first, before it's about actually taking care of the people. We just, and in every sphere, whether it's in health and it's so vital in education. We've got the whole literacy thing that's going down at the moment, where we came out ranked the lowest out of all the countries surveyed, 58 countries.
Pathetic.
Pathetic score. And the next was Egypt, and it was double our score. I mean, that's like, wow, what are we doing here? 80% of children in grade 4 have got zero literacy, and that's in their home tongue, never mind in another language. So, I mean, we see a massive problem there. And it goes back to what's the agenda? What's the intention here? And the problem is when it's like gangrene. So when your little toe gets gangrene, you don't want to cut it off because it's been with you all your life and you like your little toe, and it's a friendly little fellow, and so you'll wait a little while, and then next thing it's the foot. So, let's just hang around while I get a prosthesis made. And then it's like, well, oops, hang on, now it's the leg, and all of a sudden it's consumed us, and it gets pretty dodgy when the gangrene starts at the head, So how do we do that? If you decapitate it, you get killed anyway. So, I mean, it's a bit of a bad metaphor, but I think what I'm trying to say is that, when you start going down a slippery slope of inappropriateness, it then, if it isn't checked, it just cascades. Yeah. So you and I are on a plane to let's assume a non-stop flight from London to Sydney. It's a long flight. And we leave, and it so happens that the flight is just half a degree off course. When we fly over the channel, we're not going to notice it. But when we get to where we think Sydney is, we're going to be a long way from it. And that's the problem here, is that we've moved off course. We had Mandela come in with great vision and great principle for, a rainbow nation, for, putting together what we should have. And we've just seen, as we've gone along the way, the lack of accountability. So for me, the biggest flaw that's resided in our space is the lack of accountability. No one gets held accountable. We've had committee upon inquiry, upon whatever, the Zondo Commission, all these things. Please show me where people are taken accountable and held accountable.
There are ministers who have been implicated in Zondo who are still sitting in Ramaphosa's cabinet.
I know.
Like the minister of, no, not the minister, he changed positions. Zizi Kodwa was the Minister of State Security. He was directly implicated in the Zondo report, and there's been nothing done about him.
So that for me is a challenge, and what's sad here is that I'm not saying that every single politician is nefarious or of ill intent, but I think that you up against a very large force of people who don't want to. we're feeding at the trough, and it's fun and it's good and it's great and it's enriching, and our families are being enriched, and there's that element of, well, it's it's only fair and appropriate and it's our turn and all that sort of good stuff, and I'm not a politician. I have political views and what have you, but for me, it's about how do we get real here on the ground, and let's find collaborative effort but sincere collaborative effort between government and business, and being able to actually put in place those systems that actually work and that get to feed the people and get to reduce the poverty gap and get to educate our children and to provide them decent health care. And when you appoint a mayor like we have done in Johannesburg, my goodness me, need we say no more? And that becomes all part of this wrangling and jostling and positioning for 2024 and how we're going to stack up and show up. Guys, we've got to get the agenda right here. We're in Rome and it's burning, and there's no point in fiddling. Let's get down to putting out the fires and actually building an incredible nation, because we are a nation of great people. We've shown that time after time after time. All the predictions of 1994, the Secret Service went back to the American government 2 weeks before the elections and said, there's going to be a civil war. Well, guess what? We had a violent free elections 2 weeks later. We had the World Cup in 2010 where everybody said, oh, no, it can't be. The best run, most successful up until that point in time World Cup that was ever run. We made it happen. It was incredible how we were able to do that in the moment. Why can't we rally and pull together and come together? And it's about some people putting up their hands and saying, you know what, I'm not perfect, and you know what, I haven't done it right, and you know what, I think, let me take it on the chin, and let's now just get down and do the jobs that we're being paid to do. Let's, because when you start going down into and looking at the municipalities, we looked at the issue on the roads in the Eastern Cape and how it's impacting economies, jobs, livelihoods, agriculture. Guys, fix it. Fix it. Just, oh, sorry, we're trying to, but now we've got no money. Well, who took the money and where did it go? And and it all just gets down to sweep it under the carpet, let it go, water on the bridge, move on. We can't do that. So this is about rallying like-minded, like-resolved people with good intent to actually do that. And there needs to be a system of integrity that gets introduced into the appointment of leadership. It can't just be around, I know this guy, or nepotism, or family, or whatever. Or let's actually do this on a basis of, like you're running a business. Are you just going to, okay, well, let's just appoint the son or the cousin or somebody you know as a friend. Let them come in and run this multi-billion rand business. Oh, dear me, the business, people won't do that. Or sometimes they do, and then at great cost. But for the most part, when you're hiring in a private sector company or a listed company, there should be a fair amount of diligence done. We see lots of examples, I won't quote names here, of, oh my goodness, you've had 4 CEOs in 2 years. What are you doing wrong? Your whole mindset's wrong around how you're seeing the whole thing through the wrong set of lenses. Apply yourselves, apply the right finances, spend the money now, get the right person in. What's the cost of hiring the wrong person? What's the cost of engaging the wrong politician? We need people who can get the job done. This is not about sitting behind desks and pontificating and, rallying, not even rallying, just, waving hands. This is actually about getting people in who are going to get the job done. And the examples of those mayors that have stepped in and stepped up to the plate and made amazing impacts and successes and changes. And then you look at other municipalities and they're completely bankrupt and completely impoverished. It's about the people. At the end of the day, it's about the people. It's about the leaders.
It's about the leaders.
About the leaders.
And I suppose voters have a responsibility too, in that they need to elect.
And they should be informed,
right
properly
people.
informed. There should be, this is, part of the problem is we go to the polls next year. How many people are just not going to vote? They're angry with their party, so they're not going to vote. No. Can't do that. You've got to vote. You've got to make a choice. It's so important that think about, let's go back to if people, and I mean, if people stopped and said, what world are we leaving for our grandchildren? If I was to face my grandchildren in 25 years' time, what would they say to me? What is the world that I've left them? If everybody had that view and said, what is the world that we're leaving for our grandchildren? What example are we setting to our children? I mean, I've said this often, we don't inform children, we form them. We form them by the example we set and the love that we show them. And if our actions match our words, they'll internalize it and they'll grow up and live that out, and we can create a better world. So what example are we setting to our children? What is our conviction of? What are we convicted of in terms of purpose and value and transfer? It's easy to say it's not my responsibility. It's easy to say let somebody else do it. Let's start with picking up litter. Look at Rwanda. Mm-hmm. Genocide, horror, come off the back of it. Paul Kagame comes into power, introduces something called umuganda. Umuganda is a law whereby once a month, on the last Saturday of every month, everyone, including the president, businesses close, everything shuts down, everybody, by law, goes out and picks up litter. Mm-hmm. Today, Rwanda is one of the 3 cleanest countries in the world. And it's gone beyond picking up litter, because now it's pretty clean and tidy. It's gone into community contributions and working in housings. And when the man in the street gets interviewed, they say, it's interesting, it's law, but it's actually become lifestyle.
Interesting.
It's become lifestyle. So what's the lifestyle that we're inculcating into our children and the youth today? What's happening in these schools where the teachers aren't qualified and they're getting in there because the unions are allowing people to bribe and put people in? And so we see this malady and this malaise of ills, and it would be so easy to just capitulate and to roll over and say, oh, it's too big a job, we can't do it, we're not going to get it right. We can. Mm-hmm. Much bigger things have been achieved by mankind before, and it's about how do we start with ourselves as self-leaders and increasing our self-awareness and our consciousness and being able to say, well, what am I going to do today? How am I going to lead my family, lead my business, show up, and what am I going to do that's going to be different? Mm-hmm. That's going to be one step further in terms of setting the right example. Let's pick up the papers. Let's pick up the letters. Let's not wait for somebody else to do it. And we're seeing that starting to happen in communities where they're getting together and they're saying, if we wait for government, we're going to get nothing. Let's fix it ourselves. The guys that are fixing potholes in their spaces and coming together. So let's get more of that. But then let's find a way to hold government accountable. And that's not an easy task. And I don't have a magic wand and a box of magic tricks, and I don't have a silver bullet. All I'm saying, though, is...
Well, we get to hold them accountable next year.
Hold accountable. Let's go back to political values are based on social values, which are based on individual values. So if we get the individual values right and create a groundswell of the right individual values, we will shift the social values. And if we shift the social values appropriately and sufficiently, we'll shift the political values. Mm-hmm. And that way we can make that permanent change. But it starts with me in the pursuit of we. Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a good point to end the discussion, Bryan. Fascinating insights as always. Thanks so much for joining us.
What a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you.
TechCentral Show. You're MD of CMD, CEO. What's your title? Founder.
My card actually says Merchant of Hope, but my title is I'm actually the CEO of Cycan.
Cycan, and that's online at cycan.co.za.
That is indeed.
CYCAN.
Correct.
.co.za. Bryan, it's always good to chat to you. Thanks so much for
Fantastic, Duncan. Thank you for the opportunity.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome.